Alexis, thank you so much for joining me today. Now, before we dive into your incredible experience, I want to talk a bit about what set you down the sustainability path. Was there a crucial moment where you realized this was the right path for you?
It's interesting that you asked that because I didn't start out in sustainability. I actually started out in international development. I thought I would be working on the ground in foreign countries. And I was at one point in rural northern Nicaragua for 2.5 years. And one of the things that I started to realize is all the projects was doing there had a direct relationship to some decision made in a boardroom way upstream, and we were kind of dealing way after the fact with the outcomes of that decision. There was nothing illegal about that decision. There was nothing wrong with it. It just didn't take all of the factors into account. And then we had to deal with it later. And I was noticing this right about the same time that I had picked up a Newsweek magazine, and it had an article about Greenpeace activists going back and getting their MBAs. And that just seemed to make so much sense to me, because wouldn't you want to take that level of knowledge and commitment to making a different outcome, come about a more sustainable outcome, but be able to translate it in the kind of language that CEOs and businesses needed to understand and make it win for everybody? So yeah, that turned me completely on my path. I wound up going back to business school, getting a Master of Science and an MBA from Michigan, and working for many years with B2C companies, so business to consumer companies, for years after that, before I switched over into the, B2B and engineering space.
Now, diving into your B2C experience, you spent over a decade helping to advance sustainability at Adidas, which is where we actually met. Can you share a bit about what that journey was like? Some of the biggest learnings you had, as well as what you're most proud of?
Yeah. Um, First and foremost, and this lesson kind of was started even before I got to Adidas, but it was definitely true at Adidas too. You should really write your own job description. And that's possible. When I originally came to Adidas, it was to help with a very specific project related to the London Olympics. And that was going to be the first sustainable green games. And they needed something specific in helping with that in terms of how do you work on product. But actually, I saw that there was this huge need around all different aspects of product and innovation, and even building up a materials library to be able to have the kind of materials we needed to build sustainable product. There was just so much else around it that was needed, and nobody was doing it. So I just started asking them, well, can I incorporate this into the plan, and shall I take this on? Um, and I actually just started doing some of these things, even when they weren't in my job description. And pretty soon they became my job. So one of the first lessons I learned, it was true in other companies before, but yes, you should and can write your own job description. Um, the second lesson that I learned is that org structure actually really matters. And that is, I mean, sustainability should be located at the core of the business. Whatever is driving the business, in a place like Adidas, it's product and marketing. And so then, it should be located within that area of the business in order to drive the business forward so that you can really affect what it offers into the world. Um, I had actually moved the department around that core area of product and marketing. First, it started in a business unit with the Olympics. Then, second, it moved into innovation when we needed to solve certain challenges in innovation. And then it ultimately wound up more in the sort of marketing and strategy area. And that was what needed to get done in order to make it part of the fundamental decision making of those areas. And the last part that I learned a lot is that story really matters. The ability to be able to help people visualize the kind of future you're trying to bring about, and how exciting and how desirable and cool and that is, actually accelerates the activities you do in that space. Um, People often know Adidas based on the Parley and ocean plastic story. about how we, brought a lot of ocean plastic into our products and used recycled content in our products. But actually, that was true. We did a huge amount of that, but fractionally, that was small in comparison to all the product that we create. There was a lot of recycled polyester bottles that didn't come from oceans, but were recycled. That also went into our products. But people were able to understand the scale of the problem of needing to recycle and needing to put things into have recycled products and more sustainable products when they could visualize a, a dirty beach. And if you don't tell the story in a way that makes it very accessible to people and that they can visualize it, you won't have people bought in for the whole journey. So the third thing I would say is story really matters.
Absolutely. I love each of those three things. And one thing I often find myself saying is that a story makes the world go round. We are human creatures that are moved by story. We're not moved by data
Mhm.
points. And I think you gave a really good example of how to harness story in a really powerful way to support sustainability. Um, Now, I want to dive a little bit deeper. Often, initially, converting to more sustainable approaches or materials can be capital intensive for a company. Can you share a bit about how Adidas decided to embed sustainability into the business model and way of operating?
Mhm. I can share a couple of examples that make it quite concrete, but there's a theme that ties them all together. And it's actually about if you're able to sort of walk the business through seeing into the future, so to speak, showing them that this is actually the path the future is going to go down. And so making these changes right now actually make it a better, stronger business and ultimately help it in terms of profitability in that future. So it's better to invest in it now than to have to pay the consequences of it later. That is something that actually really helps in terms of bringing the business along and making them take action faster than maybe they would have. So, some concrete examples of it, some occurred at Adidas way before I arrived. I was really lucky that Adidas had this strong existing foundation around supply chain management and that orientation around workers' rights. That was something that started back in the 1990s because with the Nike soccer ball scandal back then, child labor was found in Nike supply chain. Adidas was able to visualize, oh, how much do we know what's going on in our supply chain? We need to set up the infrastructure to be able to know. And so it was able to see, okay, that's a future I don't want. So I can set up this infrastructure now. And it had a huge cost, but it was willing to pay it because it was very clear we're going to have a future where you need to stabilize, insulate, and improve, actually innovate with your supply chain. And after I arrived, there was things more around the product or innovation side of things. So one of my first projects was around the London Olympics, those green games. And there it was a lot about the product innovation we brought forward. There's dry dye, like the first waterless dyeing that actually went into product, and prime knit that knitted these zero waste shoes. That was something that you could fold into the story and the product innovation that's expected out of the Olympics. So that it was really clear linkage to something that was very important to the company. And you could show how that furthered the goals of the company because product innovation is core to what it does. In the innovation space, actually already similar timeline, so not, yeah, around 2012, we're already working on the innovations in that team to that eventually came out as the Futurecraft Loop products. That was the closed loop products that you could basically grind them up, turn them back into a sneaker thereafter. And that was also, again, because of thinking forward as what is innovation going to mean in the future? And how are we going to already start preparing now to have actually performance innovation that meets this criteria? You know, people don't realize that shoes are actually a little bit like race cars. The amount of force and tension that is on them is incredibly strong. And so the ability to be able to make those kind of sustainable products, but ones that actually work, that was hard. And so you needed to spend the time early looking into that innovation. And I think the last thing, like we said before, it's a little bit about how you create a movement around a topic. There was a lot of awareness starting to raise up about ocean plastic and why that was bad. And one of the things that we realized is fundamentally, Adidas is a plastics company. You wouldn't normally think of us that way, but that is a plastics company because all of the product was made out of things that were derived from, frankly, fossil fuels. And so, in order to actually gain excitement around, how shall we be switching this on over? How shall we be moving into a sustainable future? Paired up with Parley for the Oceans and also created this Run for the Oceans movement. And that was around giving people an opportunity to say, I'm not only going to care about this topic, I'm going to take actions on it. I'm going to clean up, I'm going to pledge, I'm going to tell friends about it, I'm going to spread word on it. So it gave people actually a way to talk about the story and help give an outlet for them to talk to their peers and spread the message, create a movement.
Mm. Thank you for that. I want to pull out a few things you said. One that I want to emphasize is how you mentioned that Adidas is essentially a plastics company, but you wouldn't consider that. You consider it a sportswear company, right? And I think it's interesting to point that out because things aren't always what they appear to be anywhere in life. And so peeling back the layers and seeing that the materials that are used in sportswear are petroleum based and plastic itself is petroleum based, which a lot of people, I don't think that's common knowledge. It's a really interesting thing to see where are the components coming from that actually make up the industry that you're in, and are those components sustainable or not sustainable. So thank you for mentioning that. And another thing you mentioned that I think is interesting is the emphasis of sustainability within the innovation space and looking forward, looking at what's needed to stay relevant in the industry, to stay cutting edge in the industry, and really tying sustainability as a competitive advantage in that way within the industry, and the importance of understanding where it makes sense to be in a company based on where it's going to strengthen the company the most.
Yeah. That kind of simplification of both what are you supposed to be working on? So just simplifying it down instead of thinking of all the complexities of the product, but simplifying down to say, we're a plastics company. So that's what we're about. Or the most important thing to us is innovation. So this is the future of innovation. When you simplify it down like that, it takes away the overwhelmingness that is quite natural in this space because it feels like you got to tackle every problem at the same time. But that simplification, that focus is key.
Now, for over 20 years, Adidas has been a leader in retail sustainability, consistently rated on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index since the creation of the index. What do you think helped contribute to Adidas being successful within sustainability? What factors?
There's one that I want to call out over all others because there's lots of important factors, but there's one that kind of sticks its head above all others and actually enables all others, or without it makes them not so powerful. And it's senior leadership. It might be cliche to say it, but I can give some key examples at Adidas on how that happened. And then honestly, that was what brought me to Arcadis in seeing that come from our board. So, okay, Eric Liedtke, who used to be the president of brands at Adidas, so chief marketing officer, basically number two to the CEO. Eric cared about this topic, personally cared about it. He was a surfer. He was seeing what was happening in the oceans, what was happening on beaches, and it just felt very intimate to him. And people noticed that level of interest in the topic. And he'd asked me to come in and give him tutorials to just, help me understand what's going on in the plastic space. What are the issues in terms of circular economy? What is circular economy? That level of interest actually came through in every commitment that he made and every topic that he talked about. And so naturally all of his leadership around him, because Eric cared about it, started to care about it. So there was that personal commitment and passion that came through that made his leadership kind of also become interested. It was also his ability to focus on very few things, be able to tease out and say, there are a million problems that the world needs to solve. What is most material to Adidas? And that really helped because then we were able to zoom in and say, oh, okay, well, an overwhelming number of our products are made out of this one material, polyester, and you can recycle plastic into polyester. So let's make that one of the core things. And we had other core areas like closed loop topics, etc. But like zooming into those few things and saying, I know those other stuff, super important, but not for us to be doing. And then I think that story and charisma capability. Now, granted, Eric was leading a marketing company and he was well suited to do so because that ability to be a storyteller that tells people a vision they want to buy into, Eric could just share that level of excitement and enthusiasm and vision that if we went down this path, we would just simply get a better future, more awesome. You'd want it. It was desirable. And that gave people such an excitement that they actually started coming up with more creative ideas. They would be able to bring more in, and he would highlight, all the ideas that were coming out, and so people would start to see their innovations recognized. And this all comes back to the same fundamental thing. He actually liked the topic. It was something he'd read about after work, and it's a lot to ask of leadership for that to be the case, but I'm a little biased. I think this is literally the most important topic in the world right now. So there's got to be something about it your leadership could find excitement in. So that actually made a huge difference. And I think truly moved Adidas faster on a path where other brands were innovating around it, but people would tell us that same level of intimate commitment to it and the pushing the needle on it wasn't happening other places.
I 100% agree. And senior leadership championship of sustainability or anything else within ESG, environmental social governance, is the most important thing to actually make progress because it requires doing things differently. It requires testing new approaches and trying new approaches, investing in new approaches. Now, last year you joined Arcadis as Chief Sustainability Officer. In that move, you completely switched industries. What prompted that shift?
Yeah. So I'd been working in B2C all this time, business to consumer. And the reason why was because actually coming out of business school back then, so I'm dating myself a little, sustainability wasn't a sexy topic. It was very crunchy, it was very responsible, it was very heavy, and there were committed experts working on this, but this was not a common pop culture kind of topic. And what I really thought was needed in that's why I spent so much time in B2C was how are we going to start creating the products that are desirable and the pull for innovation that actually makes that future something that we actually want to go out and create a pull force for. And over the time that I was working in it for 15 plus years, that evolution started to occur. It wasn't just Adidas; it was starting to occur because that people noticed that that was a missing space. And so it felt like one, the goal was being realized, but two, it felt like that was just not enough. Like we needed to literally rebuild our world differently if we wanted to meet the goals of Paris. And then COVID hit, and literally the entire economy just kind of ramped down. And there was a moment in time when it felt like, okay, this is unique. We could actually ramp back up the economy, rebuild our spaces, but build back better. Do it in the way that we should do it if we actually wanted to revolutionize our economy and our built spaces. And I got so excited about this idea. But, I kind of kept it to myself because who would want to hire somebody who had spent a lot of years working on sneakers to work on rail and buildings and engineering? Like I just never saw that that would pass on over. And I was a little lucky. Arcadis came looking for me at that time. And one of the things I saw, which I never would have guessed, is that there is so much commonality between the different sectors, totally different industries, but the challenges that they're trying to tackle, that they're facing in sustainability are the same. It's the same challenges around strategy, focus, go to market, the same base level knowledge that you need to do in terms of how do you assess where true impact is. It's the same thing in terms of like, how do you talk to clients? How do you support clients? And so actually, it was pretty one-to-one transferable. And I guess I'm really lucky in that regard because it's so exciting to be able to literally be part of like building the world that we need to switch over within a decade. We need to get to having global emissions by 2030 and then zero by 2050 if we want to stay on track for the goals of Paris, hitting that 1.5-degree world. And that means like all the action should be happening in this space for the next 10 years. And it's pretty fun to be able to work in it.
That's incredible. Now, Arcadis's purpose is to improve quality of life with your clients without compromise. Can you share a bit more about what Arcadis does and how they do it? I know you touched on it briefly, but just to give a little bit more of an elevator pitch
Sure.
of.
So I'm not surprised for outside of the B2B world. So for an average consumer, they might not know the name of Arcadis. It's a design and engineering consultancy. We design natural and built assets. So essentially the built environment that you live in, we create it. And it's a Dutch company, goes back to the 1800s, was actually established around helping build Holland, reclaim land from the sea, build up dikes. That was the origins of Arcadis. But as the years have gone on, it's spread into all areas of design and engineering. We have three major global business areas around what's called resilience, so the energy, environment, space, mobility, which is just as it sounds, and places being the built environment that people work in. So we actually design, engineer, execute on projects for all of that.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Now, being a sustainability expert, are there some sustainability terms you notice that in conversation that people don't understand or maybe they misuse that you want to share?
Oh boy, is that a good question? Because I feel like there's so much jargon. And the hardest thing is to be able to get into simple language that everybody understands. Um, Let me just start with our ambition at Arcadis. So at Arcadis, we've committed to accelerate the transition to the net zero world in a way that improves quality of life for all. People hear that term net zero and go, what's net zero? What's a net zero world? And the key things in that ambition is one, we're looking to accelerate, meaning go faster. The world is not going fast enough, so let's go faster towards a destination. That destination is the operating model we'll all be living in when we have a sustainable world, when we emit zero emissions. It's net zero, meaning there's no carbon going up into the atmosphere, and it's sustainable. So it's a place, net zero. Now, in a way that improves quality of life for all, there's another term that often gets shared around a lot, saying we need a just transition. What does just transition mean? Just transition is about that equity that we need to pay attention to in the solutions that we bring to get ourselves to that net zero world. So, for example, you could use renewable energy and build a lot of that in order to help get the infrastructure towards the net zero world. There will also be nature-based solutions like restoring mangroves, That will actually suck a lot of carbon out of the air and improve the biodiversity. That's also a way of getting there. There's societal solutions that we need. Just take in the inner city, in low income housing, often that might not be a profitable business space for many companies to choose to invest in and say, I actually want to go renovate those kind of buildings. I want to make them insulated. I want to put solar panels on the roof. However, if we don't do that, then there is a huge chunk of our built environment that's going to keep emitting out into the world, out into the world and keep us away from that zero carbon emissions that we need to get to. However, if we go tackle that problem, find a business model that makes solving that problem profitable, you get to a net zero world, and at the same time you set up the society that you actually want to live in, where there actually is high quality, low carbon housing for everyone. So these kinds of topics, it's easier to say, instead of saying net zero, talk about the place you want to be building, the world you want to be building, or just transition. Actually talk about how that would intimately affect people. So one of the things I've learned is, sure, if you're with your sustainability colleagues, you can use all the acronyms you want. But when it comes to talking to everybody else in the business, just use concrete examples with very straight language.
I love that. And I love the advice of focusing on the end destination and what that looks like, and then figuring out what it would take to get there, and not getting necessarily caught up in the terms, but what would it actually mean and how can we do it in an intentional way that has positive benefits in a lot of different areas. Now, at the end of 2020, Arcadis announced their 3-year plan, which centers sustainability at the heart of their growth strategy, stating, "We will embed sustainability across everything we do and apply our wealth of expertise and skills to deliver competitive, resilient, and effective solutions for our clients within planetary boundaries." Could you please share a little bit about the 3-year plan and what Arcadis is focused on?
So this was right before I joined Arcadis, and honestly, it got me into the company because essentially what they're saying right there is sustainability is the core of our business model. We are now going to drive directly at providing sustainable solutions to our client, and we'll do so in a couple of ways. So they named three things. We're going to deliver digital tools also as enablers in order to get us faster to some of those sustainable solutions. So help us find unique new solutions and enable more digital ones. And then thirdly, it was actually about what they called focus and scale, which was actually around the structure of the organization. So globalizing the company. It was a multinational company to begin with. Pretty much every company in our sector is that now. It means that you have these companies in different countries and they roll up financially to a global center, but they don't operate that way. And so you can't actually easily share innovation and knowledge and bring things to different places. But Arcadis restructured to actually be a global company. And so what that meant is these were global business areas. We could bring talent from all over the world and use cross-city exchanges, cross-client exchanges in order to bring the best sustainable solutions to market. So that's a little bit about what the strategy means. The thing that was pretty exciting to me, and is not always true in every sustainability job, is essentially they said, well, therefore, what we're asking you to do is help us figure out how we're executing our business strategy, our core business model, because the destination we're all driving at, the highest priority is sustainable solutions. So how do we do that? I think any sustainability professional should look to try and make that part of their job. Because if you're not looking at the fundamental core of what the business sells and is known for, then you're not actually changing the track. You're kind of dancing around the edges.
I love that advice. And 100%, I think for anything to be using the sustainability term again in a different way, for anything to be sustainable long term in a company, it needs to be embedded into the heart of the business and the core of what the company does, and considered when thinking about how, from a business strategy standpoint, how the business wants to evolve in the future. That needs to be an integrated piece. And so I love that you emphasized the importance of sustainability within Arcadis, it being at the heart of the strategy and why that attracted you to the company to begin with. Now, one of the projects Arcadis is working on is developing a strategy and implementation program to transition Amsterdam from natural gas to renewables safely and affordably by 2040. That's a massive project. How does a project like that even get started?
Yeah, and it's actually even bigger than that. So let me talk you through it a little bit. Essentially, a little bit of context first. So all cities in Holland need to be natural gas free by 2050, related to some of the challenges around earthquakes that are being caused in the country. So there was already a level of awareness around this topic that there would be an end goal in sight. But Amsterdam actually wanted to pull that forward and do it 2040 or sooner. And it's not actually an easy feat if you think about it. Think how many of our homes are heated by natural gas. In fact, how much we rely on natural gas for heat. So you need to replace all that infrastructure and do so in a way that is affordable, that is sustainable in all senses, green and able to continue. And so Arcadis was actually working to develop this heating plan, this heating vision for the city. And so the project actually became a success. You know us because of engineering, right? You would think it was because of how we designed the pipes. No, it's actually because of the multi-party stakeholder approach that we took to this project. So this was about finding all the different interests that were there, from business to the citizenry to challenges around mobility to housing efficient design, bringing all of these factors together into one group and finding ways to create win-wins where it would minimize extra costs for citizens to transition their homes, where actually there were funding alternatives and subsidies that would come in that would accelerate the desire to pull that forward and actually save the city also money because we would be doing certain actions sooner. So 2017 to 2021, we actually incorporated that Arcadis plan, and it was transferred back to the government to be owned by the line managers in the cities. And the outcome, like I said, is bigger than what we originally thought. So we wound up actually preparing visions for heat transition plans for almost one third of 350 municipalities in Holland.
Wow.
So then we realized, like I said, global company now. They said, oh, well, the UK is going to need that. So will Australia. So will New York. So we actually already brought it to them to start discussing their heat vision plan. So this is a way that you can actually take one set of learnings and one need that's originated in one place and then globalize it up to accelerate the transition to a net zero world. Also, in a way that was improving that quality of life for all, because that was equally applied across the citizenry, meaning that people were getting the housing subsidies to be able to do this regardless of their income. I think also what is important in terms of lessons learned, in these kinds of projects, you can't make the project the goal in and of itself. It can't be just about natural gas. It should actually be combined with lots of different perspectives in order to get it to a successful conclusion. So other actions like better housing or mobility were key in making this plan come to life. And you have to involve citizens in that conversation. And ultimately, you'll build a program that hopefully has a fund and collab between the different stakeholders, and that actually the communication that you've built between them makes that to be a stable and sustainable plan.
I love that example and the holistic and collaborative approach that was taken. Now, is there another project you're working on that's a good example of supporting the 3-year strategy?
Uh, there's one that happens to be my favorite of the week. Somebody told me about it recently. Um, we're working on high speed 2, high speed rail line in the UK, and actually, that we're working on a stretch between London and Birmingham, and this is one where you would want to reduce your carbon impact actually in building it, but you also want to build it in such a way that over the operating life of it, it is also going to reduce emissions to the max. And because of how they tackled the design and how they built the rail line, it actually saved uh, and concrete because you use green tunnels and viaducts, and the way of building it actually enabled you to use less concrete in the design. So some stats, because people are like, that sounds nice, what's the proof? It actually led to a 43% reduction in emissions in the project. It was a 50% reduction in concrete in the project. There was a net increase in biodiversity along that stretch of the line. So then it also led to 200K of less CO2 put up into the atmosphere. So all of these benefits came in because designers and engineers didn't just look and create a rail line. They asked themselves a question on how would you design this to get the max benefit outcome out of all of these problems that we all wanted to solve within one design. So I like the multi-dimensional approach to that.
That's really cool. Uh, it seems like Arcadis is doing a lot of stuff that is worthy of being really proud of. Now, when you take a step back, I guess I'm curious, what's the thing you're most proud of when you think about your company?
It's a thing that I tell other people all the time when they're asking, what is Arcadis and should I come to work for it? Um, there really is a culture at the company that is grounded around its purpose. And its purpose has been since the beginning improving quality of life. And that has led over the last decades to meaning that it is grounded in the purpose around sustainability. How do we improve quality of life for all? And that means that people have this incredible commitment to it coming into the company. It's literally the thing that gets them in the door and keeps them there, is the genuineness of that commitment. And I said before about the importance of personal commitment from leadership on this. I have 6 board members. There's 6 on the executive leadership team, 6 board members, all of which have that level of personal commitment to the topic. That's almost unheard of in many companies. Like most people care about other things, but the level of personal interest to it, that's not only in our executive board, but even in our supervisory board, is just huge. And so it really permeates every level of the company, and it's something that really keeps people there. So the enthusiasm around generating ideas for this is really, really high. So I think you need to work it through the whole culture in such a way that actually that becomes something that definitely will pull people to the company and will also create some of the best ideas. I talked all about the lovely sustainability benefits from high speed 2, but that actually, those designs, when you save concrete, you also save money. And that is a valuable asset to have for the company, to have people so excited about trying to figure out how to make a sustainable future and also make one that's realistic that you can build.
Mm. Uh, I love that example. And I love that you talked about the talent magnet aspect of having sustainability at the heart of what you do and really integrated across the culture. And I think about, I am just imagining what I think it would be like to work there. And it seems like there's another interesting level of problem solving that's given. It's not only how do we design an amazing, fast rail line, but how do we do it in a way that has the lowest footprint possible? How do we do it in a way that's never been done before? And that's a lot more interesting for employees to spend their energy trying to
Yeah.
solve than a problem that's been solved before.
Hmm. It gets an extra level of energy and commitment out of it. I saw it previous at Adidas. I see it here. Is that um, when people are allowed to make this core to what their day job is, then it's interesting the amount of extra effort that kind of goes in to working on something. And the company gets that extra benefit out of it kind of for free because people are so excited about what they get to work on and it has meaning towards them. I heard this story about a little side note. I heard the story about how they were having some pretty successful learning platforms in some schools in Berlin. And what it was actually about having the class decide every year a question they wanted to get answered, like how do we go to the moon, or how do we build, a net zero planet. And then they related every single class that they had: math, science, history. In the history one was, how did people go to the moon? In geology, it was, how would you build, terraform a planet? All of these things that get related back to that one first question and meaning. And it gives you meaning in terms of working on that stuff. You get better students, you get better learning, and then you actually get better output because you can use it.
That sounds incredible. I wish I had gone to a school like that.
I know, me too. That was not how I learned geometry. But
No, not at all. Now, what sustainability practices are in place at Arcadis that you wish were more widespread?
hmm. um, there is a lot of um, communities of practice. So people collecting around a certain area, domain of expertise, a certain interest, and then they're sharing with each other their learnings in how they bring that in to their work. So I was talking before about the culture being so important. Um, it enables not only the overarching culture to be there around sustainability, but those subcultures to be there around, different aspects of sustainable design, or out of people who are more focused on the biodiversity aspect of things, and to find those networks there. And it works pretty well in Arcadis. And so those kind of, I think it's so important in sustainability that you find people who are like you around you. You get your network set up, your peers, just some people who you feel are tackling the same struggle that you are. I see that as something that Arcadis does really well. And also, people support each other a lot in that area. So it does spread learning, and it actually does sort of accelerate the upskilling of people across the area because they're teaching each other back and forth. I'd love to see that happen more in other companies, something that's pretty hard to replicate.
Mm. As you were saying that, I was just thinking it seems like people being drawn together from a commonality of curiosity, a base of
Hmm.
how can we do things better and how do we solve these problems,
Hmm.
and a desire to solve similar problems, which is really cool.
Yeah. And allowing space for that.
Hmm. Now, pivoting a little bit, thinking back on your experience and creating sustainability strategy, do you have any advice for any up and coming sustainability officers on how to get started at their own companies?
Uh, One piece before you even get into a company, people are going to give you a lot of career advice on this is the way that you get to work on this topic. Um, don't follow it. Follow doing the stuff that's really interesting to you and the pull that you feel actually needs the problem that needs to get solved in business. And you can find a way to essentially write your own JD, because you will wind up finding a way through the work that you find interesting to, by actually getting into the company and starting to do it. I have to admit, I did a fair amount without permission at the beginning, and then it became my job. It became my job because nobody else was doing it. It was a useful thing to do, and I just started doing it. So I was told a lot, you couldn't possibly go work in a big product company. You couldn't possibly work on sustainability. First, you need to go work in traditional marketing, and you need to, work on product, and, go join management consulting or whatever. And all of those sounded really dull. And I didn't want to wake up every day and go do that at work. And so I just decided I was going to follow this path. And sure enough, it just kept creating jobs. None of my jobs actually were jobs that I per se applied for. They were always something that started off my engagement with a company, and then actually just I created my own job. Um, Often I get people coming to me now and saying, like, how can I have your career? Like, how can I do exactly what you did? And I said, but none of the jobs that I had were there to begin with. Even coming to Arcadis, I'm their first chief sustainability officer. I was technically hired for the first time in my life to actually fill a role that was already created, but they didn't know fully what they wanted out of it. They knew they needed it, and they knew they wanted me to shape it, but they didn't know what was in it. And so you really do have that freedom to be able to determine what is in your day job if you can make a good case for it. So I think that is more on the career advice side. In terms of engaging with companies, the core thing is, like, are you explaining how this is valuable to the company and their business model? Because so often people get focused on, we need to do sustainability because it's the right thing to do, or because investors are saying we should do it, or but then a business is there to actually make money and create certain value, create certain products. So why shouldn't this be core to how it approaches its day job? And too often I wind up seeing the justification on this being for some other factor, and then it just becomes siloed off to the side. If it's a compliance thing, if it's a storytelling thing, if it's a risk management thing, it's over here. And it's not the stuff that they'll be investing in. They'll do it, but they won't be investing in it unless you really make the case of how it's part of the business model.
That makes me think back earlier in the conversation about tying sustainability to innovation at Adidas. So making it core to something that was central to the business staying relevant going forward. And I think that is such great advice. And I have to say, I love your career advice. And the things that really stuck out for me there are the emphasis that there is no one path. So,
No.
not to fall into the falsehood of believing that there is no one path. And in charting your own, the importance of listening to where your energy is pulling you and honoring that. And also having the audacity, having the courage, having the um, curiosity to just start doing and
Hmm.
start solving the problems and see what
Totally ask for
happens.
forgiveness. It's so much better to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. Permission
Hmm.
takes a very long time. And as long as you know they won't be really mad about it, definitely ask for forgiveness.
I love that. Now, how has businesses' understanding of sustainability changed over the course of your career?
Oh, uh, I don't want to date myself too much, but like 20 years ago, you, all the conversation around sustainability was in the shape of risk and managing risk and some compliance. Really, there was a lot there. There were visionaries who saw it differently, but that was not the norm in terms of how business engaged with the topic. There was a shift over time to go more into the, you know, ESG space, and then came all the acronyms: creating shared value, ESG, triple bottom line, like that sort of phase of describing it as something that often in the ESG space came down to, there are a certain set of boxes that you should be checking and go through it. And that led to a lot of good developments like sustainability reporting, but a lot of, I'm doing it because I'm doing sustainability reporting, for investors or something. Luckily, I think we moved a bit past that stage where it actually became more considered sustainability in the terms of people, planet, profit coming together to actually create truly sustainable momentum, like self-sustaining momentum, which gets into that business model space. And that was much more recent. It didn't feel like that fully arrived until, I don't know, 5 or so years ago. Um, and I still don't see it everywhere. There's a lot still in the ESG space. Now, there's a sort of newness that came out starting with COVID, from a sheer, pop culture conversation. The Don't Look Up movie has really put it front and center for a lot of people, is the urgency piece of it. Like, oh my God, there are real deadlines that have to be met with hard numbers that we need to hit at a certain time, or otherwise life as we know it is done. That kind of able to relate it to the metaphor of a comet. It's going to hit if you don't focus on exactly what you need to push the comet off course. That's also starting to focus and target the actions that are around there. One of the things that sustainability can bring along to it is it can mean everything to everybody. It's all good things. It's hugging trees and kissing bunnies. And that's great, but it doesn't focus you on action. And this is now very much from Paris to Glasgow and going forward, really starting to focus on what are we going to do about it right now? What investments are we going to make? And that time scale that people are talking about has completely shifted. Conversation used to be about 2050 plus, and then it was about 2050. And now it's about reducing global emissions by 2030. And then people say, if you're going to get half of global emissions by 2030, then tomorrow, like by 2022, I need to be able to get to X. And that level of urgency and speed and core focus of how we just shift the systems and the infrastructure, that didn't exist before a year or two ago.
Hmm. I love your emphasis on focus. And that's come up a few times. And as you were talking about the focus of a company versus, I guess, years ago when ESG was first evolving and the environmental was just boxes that people were checking, that's not really focus. It's kind of following what you've been told to do. And it made me think of a tangent to your career advice on a personal level of there is no one path to take. And I think that's true also when it comes to a company and figuring out how that company can make the most material impact based on what they do. So the way that Arcadis can make an impact is different than the way that Adidas can make an impact. But what's important between both of them figuring that out is focusing on what's most material for their industry and their company.
I think one of the things that has really struck me for years is actually companies should be in the job of actually influencing and creating the systems around them in which they operate. And several just kind of take it for granted that I'm just going to run in the system that's there and don't do anything to touch it. And giving a personal example. So I'm a chief sustainability officer. I should really care about this topic. I'm also a mom of two small kids, 5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And when I'm in the grocery store and they want to put like all of the stuff in the basket, I'm struggling to try and read the little label on the milk that says this one's more organic and that one's more, regenerative agriculture and this one is almond, and trying to figure out all of these labels. And I can just skip because I'm I go with the one that I think is the best and I just decide and go forward. And it's because the system hasn't been set up around me to make it easy for me to make the best choice. And I have other things that I've got going on in my life. And I'm somebody who's supposed to care, you know? And so actually what our businesses should be in the job of doing is influencing so that we're all competing to get to the same goal. We'll set up the same playing field, the same measurement framework, the same systems to compete on, so that we can truly compete on it, so that your client or your customer can actually choose which one is functionally or factually better. And then you can put more responsibility back on the individual person or company, but only then. Because right now, everything in our systems is, steering people in a specific direction. And it's no surprise our personal decisions alone are not going to get us to net zero. It's our reinventing of the systems around us that will put us on the incentive track that it'll be super easy to slip into the right habits that will get us towards net zero.
Mm, I love that. And I wonder if that answers the next question I was going to ask you, actually, which was what role do you think business can or should play in advancing sustainability and combating climate change?
There's a couple pieces there. One, I would wish that all companies would take it as their own responsibility to help influence the systems around them. Um, I also think, though, that companies have a role to play, and they're only one of many actors, and all need to be pulling in the right direction. Governments, NGOs have key roles to play, should play them actively with great strength, and influence the direction that we're going in. What business can bring to the table is one, speed. It can often move at a pace that many other parts of the society struggle to do so. So speed is definitely one thing it could bring to the table. Mm, Also, that sort of self-sustaining capability. A business is set up to focus on the business model and on the profit. And so if you set the rules of the game right, so that actually we're aligning profit with the outcome we want to see, they're really good at finding ways to develop a self-sustaining business model there. And I think lastly, business is good. It shouldn't be the only one. I think media plays a huge role here, but they're also pretty good at selling a vision. And take like Tesla. Before Tesla, electric cars were kind of like small, couldn't go very far, not a lot of fun. Tesla put a big red sports car out there on the market and said, oh, you're going to go from 0 to 60 faster than anything else. It's electric, it's super cool. Like this is exactly the car that you want. And it sold a vision of the future where actually the sustainable one was just better than everything else, and set up a track for innovation that then now everybody's competing on selling that future better than anyone else. And so business should really step up to its capability to generate that excitement around the future that we're going towards, because I don't understand why everybody doesn't want to get there in a rush. Because if you look at the future we're going to have cleaner cities, greener cities, more renewable energy coming into our homes. If you think of the kind of homes we'll have, they'll mostly be electric. They'll be run with heat pumps. I love floor heating in my home. And that capability of having homes that are better insulated, that have solar panels on your roof to charge your car, to, have more organic produce, this just sounds like a nicer future. So I don't understand why we're not just running towards it faster. And I really hope that business steps up in painting that vision of the future, but also the other parts of society do too. Government, media, NGOs. We can all just package that story better so people can grasp it and then start asking for it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And again, the power of the story to create a vision, a shared vision that people understand and are working towards collectively across all the different stakeholder groups. Now we're ending our conversation, the time we have together.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's anything we didn't cover that you'd like to mention.
I think maybe to wrap, this is literally the most interesting decade that we're living through. And I don't know how much everybody realizes that we're in a very unique moment in time. So we're going to make choices in these 10 years that are literally going to determine the future of the planet and humanity. People in the US often tend to look back to big dramatic moments in the US's history. Same thing in other countries. In the US, they tend to look back at World War II and being able to live through World War II and the 1960s and the civil rights, revolution then, and the stories that, going to the moon, these moments, and they see them as pivotal, but they also kind of talk about them like their history. There is nothing more exciting than right now. We have 10 years to make a huge movement of everything in our society. And every single job will need to support that. So one of the things when I'm talking to young engineers coming to Arcadis, saying, do you realize you now get an opportunity to be a hero in your day job every day? Because every decision that you make is going to build the infrastructure we're all going to have to live with. So it is literally up to every decision that you make on every project, whether or not we're going to make it to that goal. Now, I believe it's particularly true for engineers, this is why I came into this field. However, that's also true of financiers, accountants, designers, people who are creating events around us. Every aspect of our society is going to need to shift onto this new model. And you should be thinking of a way that you can be part of that, because we're literally part of history right now. And we're in it, so we can determine how it comes out. But only if we take personal responsibility that, no, it's not in my day job right now, but I'm going to make it be so.
I love that. And the call to action of taking personal responsibility to figure out how to use our jobs and our businesses to put us on the path we need to be on. Now, I will include a link to Arcadis in the show notes. And I just want to thank you for such a great conversation and
It was a
sharing the
lot of
great
fun.
work that you're doing.
It was my absolute pleasure, and thank you for inviting me to come on. I had a lovely time.